There is all this conversation about a gap, the COVID loss, the students are so far behind, they're, all that learning loss. And when we say this and teachers start hearing this, there becomes this mindset that we have to remediate kids, that there are all these deficits. And I promise you, this conversation about all the gaps and deficits and remediation will not allow you to meet your equity goals. In fact, they will stunt your equity goals, because remediation and deficit thinking lowers expectations. It puts in our mind that it was so bad from last time that there's no way we can recover. Rather than remediation, I wish we would talk about acceleration. How can we accelerate the learning of students? Rather than slowing it down and fixing problems and deficit thinking, how do we speed it up? You see, acceleration has a really strong effect on students' learning. If you know John Hattie's database, there's this barometer of effect that shows how powerful something is. And acceleration is good. It works. If I put remediation up here, it would be over here in the yellow zone. We want to focus on accelerating. If we could change the narrative from remediation and gaps to how will we accelerate learning for students in this format, I think we could get a lot of traction, and it would help the teachers rethink. Maybe I don't need to be thinking about all the deficits. Maybe I need to think about how I can accelerate learning for students. Whenever I show an effect size at this point in my life, someone will say to me, but distance learning has a low effect. How can you recommend, how can you advocate for distance learning when the effect size is so low? So what does that mean? What does it mean to have a low effect size for distance learning? Well, if you read the studies on distance learning, there is no difference. It's virtually nil. Distance learning is not an accelerator. It's also not negative. The setting is not the deciding factor. Technology should be viewed like planning a lesson, creating resources, a textbook. It's not the core of teaching. It's the decisions we make as students are learning, and we're listening to them. That's what makes the difference. What the teachers in your schools do every day, not the setting. So I hope this fall we are moving from crisis teaching to cohesive instruction. Whether that's blended, whether that's live, whether that's fully from a distance, we need more cohesive teaching across these platforms. Given where we are in the school year, I think we'll start talking about engaging tasks. And as school leaders, how can we support teachers in creating tasks that engage learners? There's this model, there's this continuum of engagement that I really like. And in the studies of this model, if you get students more to the right, they learn more. So a student who's withdrawing, who you get to participating, will learn more. But the goal is to get students all the way to driving. We are seeing lots of teachers who've created self-assessment rubrics for students. So at the end of a Zoom meeting or at end of a class session, they say to the students, where were you on your level of engagement today? How engaged were you in the learning? And they created indicators for each of these to explain to students how they could think about their level of engagement. So I'm honored that 74 teachers worked with Nancy and I starting on March 20th so we could learn alongside them. They were not distance learning teachers on March 13 when we closed schools. They became distance learning teachers. And several weeks into pandemic teaching, we talked about this. How can we move from participating to driving? How can we create tasks that allow students to drive their learning from a distance? So I'm going to highlight one teacher to give you a sense of what could happen in blended and distance learning. So this teacher teaches foods class, and she said, my class is going to be super boring if we have to do it only from a distance, but she got permission to send food home. So not, the food was purchased, they already had a budget for the food. She got permission to send the food home. And she said on Wednesday, they're going to watch me do exactly what I do, and they're going to replicate it. As she said, if I cut an onion, they cut an onion. If I add butter, they add butter. That is participating. Wednesday is participation. But on Thursday, on Teach Me Thursday, I will send them supplies, food, materials, with lots of options, lots of choices. And they have to make some decisions about what they want, how they want to cook it, how they want to create it, what's their goal, what are the decisions, and how can they document their learning, getting us closer to driving our learning. This is Analea, the teacher. This is one of her sections where students are following right along with her, cooking with her. This is Thursday, the first Thursday of distance learning, and these are healthy peanut butter cookies. And you can see that students seem super impressed with themselves and happy. There's a lot of choices here. You can use sun butter if you have allergies to peanuts. You can use crunchy or smooth peanut butter. You can add other nuts. You can add dried fruit, all kinds of choices. This is the first Thursday of Teach Me Thursday. And students had to document their learning. But beyond that, Analea said, I can't taste your food. You're going to have to get feedback from other people. And then you're going to have to write in response to that feedback, what would you change as a result? So I'm going to show you two clips, very short, from two different students getting feedback from their families.
Okay, you can try it now. Good? Mm-hmm.
This student said, my family never had lettuce wraps before. We really like the flavor. We don't like how messy they are. We don't like food that spills all over the plate, but the flavor was good. So she decided to redesign lettuce wraps. She wanted to do it so that food didn't fall out. The next student got feedback from her siblings.
How you guys like it?
And this student said, my siblings all said they liked it. They said it was good. They didn't give me anything to improve. And she wrote her response on the value of feedback and understanding why teachers gave her feedback. After 14 years of living, she finally said, this is why I finally get it. This is why my teachers give me so much feedback. Because if they just say they like it, I can't get any better. How could you support teachers to create tasks that allow students to drive their learning? So how could we create tasks that are some kids physically in school, some kids at home, some kids fully online distance learning? How could you create tasks or help teachers create tasks that allow students to drive? So if you're willing, in the chat, what are you thinking about in terms of moving from participation to driving? And this is for me one of the lessons learned, that years from now, we should have students doing more of the driving of their own learning rather than only participating. So if you're willing, in the chat, what's on your mind about how you could get students to drive their own learning? Thank you, Amy. More choices. Choice boards, Lucinda, thank you. Flexible timelines. Expectations, what they need to learn. Options to show what you know. Tracy, we started seeing these things called a no-show chart, where the teacher would say at the end of a lesson, you have a T-chart, all the things you know and how you can show me it. Those became really popular, these no-show charts. Begin with the end in the mind. Ask students to design their outcomes, connect to prior learning, reimagine grading processes. Yep, create performance tasks, original concepts, awesome. Collaboration with peers, feedback from peers, investigate something they're passionate about. Yep. We have a district in Northern California that started Teach Back Tuesday. And every Tuesday, students had to teach people in their home things they'd learned the previous week and do little Flipgrid videos of them teaching other people. For the teachers, it was useful because they got to see what stuck, like what of all the lessons, which stuck that they tried to teach back. And number two, if there were any misconceptions. And Teach Back Tuesday became a big thing. Now we started to notice were parents telling the teachers how much they were learning as well from these lessons. What if a little ray of sunshine in this pandemic is that because of all your efforts, with all of your kids zooming in, teaming in, Googling into their homes, and teaching them to teach other people, what if it lifts the literacy rates or the mathematics knowledge or the appreciation for the arts out there entirely in your community? I don't think that's far off. We're seeing that in a lot of communities where everyone in the home is learning stuff from the lessons we're providing. It gives me a lot of hope and promise. Another area of engagement is around the tools. The purpose of the task should determine the tool, not the other way around. Unfortunately, there are districts all over the country where the teacher professional learning is all about the tools, only about the tools. And I think we need to focus on the tasks. What is the purpose of this task? What tool will help you get there? So in the world of information, there are 4 major functions. You have to find information, use that information, create new information, and share information. These are the 4 major tasks or functions inside information. Now, when you look at finding information, when you find information, people can do it all kinds of different ways. I'm old enough to remember physically going to the library, to this room that was filled with wooden drawers. And you'd go with this alphabet and you'd find the right drawer and you'd open the drawer and you'd go through these paper cards and you'd write in your notebook what you needed. It was called the card catalog, and you'd be looking all around and you got all these drawers, and then eventually you would go into the stacks using something called the Dewey Decimal System, and you would find the books that you needed, the material you needed. You'd go to the copy machine and you'd put your dimes and quarters in and you'd photocopy. And if they didn't have it on the shelf, you went to the basement to these pieces of plastic called microfiche. You put those in a machine, more dimes and quarters, and you printed more paper, and you went home with a stack of paper to highlight later. That's how we found information. Nobody I know finds information that way anymore today. We still find information. That did not change. What changed are the tools, and they will continue to change. So if we support teachers to say, here's a function in your class, what's a tool you have? Don't get overwhelmed that there might be 5 other tools. And if you don't know what Animoto is, it's no problem, as long as you have a way for your students to share information. Teaching is hard because it matters. We all know that. That's why it's a heavy lift. Now we, I don't know, 9 weeks, 8 weeks, somewhere into pandemic teaching, most of the instructional experiences were not great. They were okay. And I think most people are trying to take their existing instruction and switch it into blended and distance learning. And what we started to notice was there were ways that teachers engaged students that got them learning more. And we put it on a pinwheel because there's no starting place and there's no stopping place. Most instructional models look very linear, look very, you first do this, then you do this, then you do this. And with A/B schedules and morning afternoon schedules and 1 week on and 1 week off and fully distanced, there's all these models all over the country. What works instructionally? We spent a lot of time figuring this out, trying to make sure it made sense. And again, on the pinwheel, because there's no starting and stopping place. What holds the pinwheel together, the pin, is your purpose for them. What will they learn? And then you have 4 options with teachers, 4 ways to engage students in learning, and you see them there. In this orientation, the 2 on the left are by and large asynchronous learning, and the 2 on the right are mainly synchronous learning. That's what started to happen over our learning in pandemic teaching. So I think these translate to physical school as well. I think they will translate back when we bring back schools better, whenever we are allowed to go back to full-time, full enrollment school. But I actually think it looks more like this. I think instruction is way more complicated than most simple models show. In terms of collaborating, this is where we put most of our time in synchronous learning. How do we get kids interacting, talking, promoting their language? And as we heard earlier, when the person was speaking earlier about his daughter missing her friends, we want to make sure that school now is not just a webinar and teachers talking. We need to figure out ways to get students interacting with each other in these platforms. I love the discussion roundtable. It's my favorite way. It's my favorite way of doing it. Mine fell off the table. Hold on just a second. There it is. So it literally is a piece of paper. Oops. Fold it in half, fold it again, triangle folded down. Students at school physically can do this, students at home can do this. Then they are reading something or watching a video or whatever, and their individual notes go here. Then they go and have a conversation. So that could be breakout rooms. In Idaho, we were working with schools where half the kids were live in the building, half were live on Zoom, and they mixed them for breakouts. 2 kids at home, 2 kids at school in a breakout room. And what they did, so for example, these are where my notes are. When I'm in a room, then here's what I take notes what Mia said, I take notes what Alex said, I take notes what Leo said, and then I write my summary in the middle. The students at home hold it up to their Chromebooks, snap a photo, and file transfer it to the teacher so the teacher can see their work. What we learned around breakout rooms or channels or teams are 3 things. Number 1, time limited. We're seeing at the secondary level a maximum of 10 minutes. At the elementary, like K1, we're seeing 2 and 3 minute breakout rooms. Number 2, a very specific task that students understand. And number 3, a product, something they have to come back to the main room and have a product for from their discussion. That increases the productivity of the breakout rooms. And so I wonder, as you think about supporting teachers who have some of their students at home and some physically in the room, or all of their students at home, how can we still maintain the communication, the interaction between the students so they're seeing those connections? This is one of the tools we use to get them to interact across. Another one is called text rendering. Your job when you read or watch or listen is to identify a significant sentence, a significant phrase, and a significant word. That's your only job. Where in this text, in this video, whatever, is a significant sentence, phrase, or word. When you go to the breakout room then, you literally, each member of the room says their sentence, they say their phrase, they say their word. We open a Google Doc for each breakout room and they take notes. Here are the sentences, here are the phrases, here are the words. And once they have all their notes down, they talk about what they heard. That gives them a very specific task that they understand and accountability to the Google Doc so the teacher can monitor what's happening in the Google Doc. What I'm hearing though is that school has been reduced to independent work and teachers talking. And if that's going to happen, we will see a learning loss because we know, yes, I'm going to talk, Lisa, let me comment on that. We know that's peer mediated, that student to student interaction is so important.